Well, I suppose I start because I haven't been given a go-ahead, but everybody's gone quiet. So that is the best time to start. So, Your Excellencies, ambassadors of Greece and Cyprus, our distinguished guests of honor, Mary Heaney and daughter Catherine, members and friends of the Irish Institute of Hellenic Studies, members of the Irish Hellenic Society, members of the Greek community in Ireland, ladies and gentlemen. It is with the greatest pleasure that I welcome you all to this event, which is an annual lecture of the Irish Institute of Hellenic Studies and the Irish Hellenic Society inaugural meeting. In this, we celebrate the poet laureate Seamus Heaney, particularly Heaney's connections with Greek heritage, culture, and myth, which inspired a significant part of his work. For those who don't know me, my name is Christina Souyoudzoglou-Haywood, and I am the director of the Irish Institute at Athens. This event is a mirror event of the event that the Irish Institute organized in Athens in conjunction with the Irish Embassy. The venue on that occasion was the Acropolis Museum, the lofty environment of the Acropolis Museum that you see there in the evening. And it was November last, on the 29th. The main speaker for this event, like for our event this evening, is Professor Emeritus John Dillon, and my predecessor as director of the Irish Institute. And he's going to speak on the same topic, hand in hand with the world, Heaney and the heritage of Greece. This was in Athens as well, was followed by readings of some of Heaney's poems, as it is going to be this evening as well, in English and in Greek translation. In the case in Athens, then, we had a poet, a very popular poet in Greek, very well-known, Katerina Angelaki-Rouk, who is the main translator of Heaney's poems as well. And we also had Yorgos Chouliaras, who some of you may remember from his time in Dublin, who is also a poet. And the event concluded in Athens with Irish music, sung by a Greek musician, a very competent Greek young lady, and that was a truly cross-cultural event. And such was the success of this event that we wanted to repeat in Dublin, albeit a little bit different, with different readers to read the poetry. And this, it was an event in Athens that was organized quite quickly after Heaney's death. In fact, we started organizing it in September, and still all of us in grief, but we regarded this when it was performed as a celebration for Heaney, not as a mourning in any way. It is befitting that the Irish Hellenic Society should join in with us in the Dublin event, since we share common interests in Greek culture, we by representing a distinctive Irish voice in Greek studies, and the Irish Hellenic Society having a long established tradition in promoting Greek culture and Irish links with Greece in Ireland. Another good reason to join forces here is the fact that both our organizations shared Seamus Heaney as a patron. I know that we have a full program, and I do not wish to take time from it, but still I would like to say just a brief couple of words about the Irish Institute in its 18th year. We are one of the 17 active foreign schools with our main mission in Athens to facilitate scholars, researchers, students in their studies and work in Greece, and also to promote, of course, Irish culture in Greece. As you can see, I'm showing you the building there and some of our this year's, or last year's rather, activities in terms of projects and also study tours, and here in Dublin, a very successful day school that you can see there projected in the middle, the title of. We enjoy the highest of reputations among the schools in the Ministry of Culture in Greece, with which, for some of our activities, we collaborate. Now, what we do would not be possible without support from Ireland. We are grateful to the universities, our main sponsors, for recognizing our contribution to education and scholarship. But in fact, we are just scraping by. I would like, therefore, to encourage you to become friends or members of our institute if you can. You have been given the publicity, so simply make a donation. We really need your support. I would not like to retain you any longer, but you can find also information about us on our website and in Facebook. To conclude, I just wanted to thank very, very briefly all the colleagues from the Irish Institute of Hellenic Studies, but particularly I let that for other people to the thanks in detail, but I'd like to thank TCD, Trinity College, for hosting this event, and also particularly from the Irish Hellenic Society, Mary McKenna, who coordinated actually quite energetically this event. So thank you very much, and without further ado, I would like to give the word to Mary now to continue the proceedings.
Thank you, Christina. And on behalf of the Irish Hellenic Society, I would like to extend to you, each and every one of you, our guests of honour, Mary and Catherine Heaney, ambassadors of Greece and Cyprus, and all our friends, both of the Irish Hellenic Society and the IIHSA. And we're looking forward to a wonderful evening. And thanks especially to the Irish Institute of Hellenic Studies for having afforded us, the Irish Hellenic Society, the opportunity of this collaboration on this very inspiring theme and evening. And also great thanks to Dr. Christine Morris here in Trinity, who equally energetically coordinated the plans with me. Obviously we won't talk too long because we have an exciting programme to get through, but I will take this opportunity to let you know that the Irish Hellenic Society is now 52 years old. It was founded in 1962 with the purpose of fostering cultural events and friendship between the peoples of Greece and Cyprus. And I suppose, in reflecting on how Seamus Heaney's work and poetry has touched us all, a highlight of our 50th year, which was 2 years ago, 2012, was when a group of us went to Mayo, to the Céide Fields, and there we were brought to Belderrick by Dr. Seamus Caulfield, archaeologist, after that, and there was Seamus Heaney's wonderful poem about Belderrick. There's every place has been touched by his work. It's like a Dingianicus, different parts of the country and aspects of our lives. But remembering Seamus, a treasure of the Irish Hellenic Society, definitely has to be the letter that we received from Seamus Heaney in 1995. He thanks us for having being invited to be an honorary member and patron, and he says, two letters here. Here's the one, excuse me. He's delighted to accept. 1995 was our first visit to Greece last October. If every future visit ends as splendidly, I am going to become even more of a Hellenist than I am already. So, I didn't mention my great thanks to my own committee, the Irish Hellenic Society, but I think on this note of Seamus Heaney, the enthusiastic Hellenist, is the perfect moment for me to pass you over to Professor Brian McGing, who is the Regius Professor of Greek here in Trinity College, and the head of the School of Histories and Humanities. And Brian will introduce you to our speaker and the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely to see you. We are going to get to the speaker. This could be a never-ending succession of introductions. I should introduce to you the Department of Classics, but another occasion. Wonderful to see a big crowd. Seamus was, of course, an extraordinary magnet in person, and it is clear that the words and images he has left us will live, inspire and delight us for as long as humans have memory. My job is to finally introduce the speaker, John Dillon, my predecessor as Regis Professor of Greek. John's connections with Seamus and Murray go back to California. John went to California in 1966, and he and Jean met Seamus and Murray in 1971. He'll tell you more about that, no doubt. John was studying at the University of California in Berkeley at the time. He had a most unusual career in Berkeley, an encouragement to any students. He arrived in the Department of Classics as a graduate student and left as chair of the department some years later, without being anywhere else in between. He was lured away from Berkeley by an irresistible offer from Trinity College Dublin, which involved a substantially reduced salary and a substantially increased workload. As he's often said himself, how could you turn that down? I won't attempt to I wouldn't be able to explain John's work. He was an unusual person as a philosopher and Regis Professor of Greek. Trinity has had distinguished philosophers, obviously going back to George Berkeley, and the Luce family name is one to conjure with. A.A. Luce, of course, a very prominent philosopher, and my former teacher and colleague John Luce, although his primary interest was the physical environment and the poetry of the Mediterranean. He actually wrote 2 or 3 very important articles on Plato in the 1940s, I think, John, was it? There are many people who should be mentioned by name here, but in passing by John Luce, I hope you'll forgive me for singling out how delightful it is to see Lyndall Luce here tonight to join us. It would be pointless, probably, to try to identify the number one classical philosopher in the world, although I'm sure various rating agencies might try. I am certain of this, that there is no one better in the field of classical philosophy living at the moment than John, and that there would be very few equals anywhere in the world. Probably one of the things that stands out for me with John's work is an exceptional ability, and I think it is exceptional, to explain the most difficult and important concepts about human behaviour and philosophy in clear, accessible, straightforward, elegant English. That is not a route that scholarship has always followed. I blame German philosophy of the 19th century, but it's perhaps another issue. But it is a huge gift, and it is a lesson for all of us to follow. The great exemplar, of course, was Plato himself. There would not be an undergraduate. I know some of our former undergraduates are here, and I hope they would confirm that anybody who knows Greek can read a paragraph of Plato and see what it means, the wider context of meaning might be more elusive. John does do other things as well. He has written a novel, you perhaps don't know that, The Scent of Eucalyptus, which is based very loosely, I should say, on his experiences as a teacher in Ethiopia. He is modest about this novel. I suspect he thinks justifiably so, but actually it has wonderful descriptions of Africa. I saw it in production for a number of years, and I recommend it. Recommendations are tricky things for students who you're not quite sure of, so if I said I cannot recommend it highly enough, you might see the ambiguity. He also, with Brendan O'Hare some years ago now, wrote a classical lexicon for Finnegan's Wake, which is far above the call of duty and the normal course of affairs. So he has form in this area of how the classical world has infused our literary and cultural consciousness. It is a great pleasure for me and an honour indeed to introduce a very long-time colleague and friend, John, to speak about Seamus Heaney and the classical heritage, and I hope you will give him a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Well, many thanks for that, Brian. It's a very hard act to follow in a way. But it's a great pleasure to be here, and especially in the presence of Mary and of Catherine. I'm conscious of the sadness of the occasion as well as everything else. And very, very glad to welcome the ambassadors of Greece and of Cyprus. Now, here is Stockholm, as they say. The shock that overcame us all, especially those of us who were his friends, at the end of last August, of the death of Seamus Heaney, has not yet much diminished. But it has given very many people, both in Ireland and around the world, the occasion to reflect upon his many virtues, both as a poet and a human being. And that process is still continuing. It's that process that I'd like to contribute to here, particularly as befits this venue and environment, it's a situation with the classical societies, in respect of his wide-ranging use as a source of inspiration of the mythology, history, and literature of ancient Greece. First, however, a few words as to the origins and course of my acquaintance with Seamus Heaney. It is, I suppose, a statistical improbability that I should ever have met him at all, considering the diversity of our backgrounds, but the happy circumstance that made it possible was my presence at the University of California at Berkeley, when Seamus, with his wife Mary and two small boys, Catherine wasn't around then, arrived in the autumn of 1970 for what was, I think, to be a very happy and fruitful year of adventure in surroundings far different from strife-torn Northern Ireland and the more peaceful but still rather grim environments of Queen's University, Belfast. My wife and I had by this time been in Berkeley for some 4 years and were well settled in, so that we were able to assist in welcoming them and showing them around. Seamus had been brought out chiefly by Tom Flanagan of the English department to a visiting lectureship. I think Seamus told the story of Tom visiting him in Queens and being shown around and finally ending up in the common room and looking around and said, "Gee, Seamus, you got to get out of here." And so it was brought about. Seamus's acute sensibilities, I think, blossomed in this new environment. We had many pleasant family expeditions and evenings together, and our friendship survived that academic year to continue for over 40 years more. We would get together back in Dublin in the summers of the 1970s, but Seamus returned to Berkeley on his own for a term in 1976, and we had a chance to look after him then also. It's a great tribute to his tolerant and amiable nature, considering, as I say, our different backgrounds and interests, that he remained a faithful friend ever afterwards, as has been his wife married to my wife Jean and myself. I dwell on this in the present context only by way of explanation of the fact that I've been able, over the years, to discuss with him certain aspects of the poems and plays that I'm going to focus on in this discourse, and have been able to observe the workings of his mind much more closely than would have been the case had I not known him personally. It's a peculiar privilege to be able, at least to some extent, to observe a great poet's mind at work, and to get some insight into how the poetic imagination makes the connections between phenomena that it does make, as it's significantly different from the workings of the scholarly mind. Not that Seamus Heaney was not also a scholar, but he was primarily and spectacularly a poet. Now, how, one may ask, did Heaney learn his Greek or begin his contact with Greek culture? He did not study it at school at St. Colum's College in Derry, but he did study Latin, as was normal enough, and was introduced to it, at least in translation, to a certain amount of Greek mythology and history. His delightful poem, Alphabets, about a child learning to read and write at the beginning of the Hall Lantern, does mention lambdas, deltas, and omegas. But this may be merely a poet's fancy, recognizing the Greek alphabet as the basis of the Roman. I must apologize for my reading. I can't come up with a soft Derry accent, but I'll do my best. Balers drop bales like printouts where stuck sheaves make lambdas on the stubble once at harvest, and the delta face of each potato pit was patted straight and moulded against frost. All gone, with the omegas that kept watch above each door, the good luck horseshoe. At any rate, he gives a fine assessment of his appreciation of Greek culture in comparison with Latin in a passage of the superb conversational autobiography that he did with Dennis O'Driscoll, Stepping Stones, in reply to a leading question, or rather remark, from O'Driscoll, who said, "Considering that Latin had been your school subject, it's surprising how frequently you draw on Greek literature and myth." Well, Sir Seamus, with the Greeks, you're hand in hand with the world. I chose that as the title of the talk. Much of the Roman stuff was texted to them, whereas the Greeks turfed it all out on their own. There's a clannish energy about the classical and pre-classical Greeks that feels familiar. I have a notion that the Irish word flower would cover what happened on many of their calendar days, better than the word festival. Epidauros wasn't exactly Glyndebourne. There was a touch of Knock Shrine about it, maybe even Puck Fair. And the frisson at the cave at Eleusis, for instance, must have been something like the frisson of the cave that pilgrims used to enter on a Loch Derg pilgrimage. A very good point. I sense a far greater closeness between the lived life and the official pomps in Greece than in Rome. It's the vitality of that ritual and romance at ground level that attracts me, as much as the big earth-moving machinery of the literature and the myths. On the basis of many conversations with him over the years, I can attest to the high degree to which the culture, history and mythology of Greece stimulated his poetic sensibility, despite his never having mastered the language, or indeed until quite late in his career, as we just were reminded, 1995, ever having visited the country. And of course, we know that was a great story, which Mary will remember well. They went off round Arcadia. We get to that again at the end of the lecture. But he did, of course, visit Greece subsequently on a number of occasions, on one of which, in 2004, he very generously gave a reading in Athens in support of the Irish Institute, and, as Mary will recall, stayed in the Institute, which was a great success. What I'd like to do on this occasion is to illustrate this poetic sensibility of his in respect of a number of poems of which I'm particularly fond, mainly taken from his collection, The Hall Lantern, of 1987, and then turn to a consideration of his treatment of a number of Greek plays, one of Aeschylus and three of Sophocles. Let's begin, however, by considering his treatment of the myth of the giant Antaeus and his confrontation with the great hero Hercules, the subject of two poems which frame part one of his collection, North. I was once deputed by a colleague in classics when Seamus was in Berkeley to ask him, as a practicing poet, how he arranged his volumes, because my colleague Bill Anderson was interested in how Horace might have arranged his volumes. And I remember Seamus scratching his head a bit, and he said, well, I'd be careful about the beginnings and the endings of the collection, and sort of about the middle. But other than that, it's a bit random. So I reported that back. And it does show, I think, in the middle of this volume, there is this great poem, the Bog Queen, which fits in very well with the Antaeus poems. At any rate, Antaeus, you will recall, perhaps, possesses the peculiar characteristic of being invincible so long as he stays in physical touch with his native earth. In order to defeat him, Hercules has to raise him forcibly from the ground and hold him until he expires. For Seamus, he is Antaeus, while the intruder Hercules is the influence of British political power and cultural dominance, I suppose. Here's the first meditation on the theme. When I lie on the ground, I arise flushed as a rose in the morning. In fights, I arrange a fall on the ring to rub myself with sand. That is operative as an elixir. I cannot be weaned off the earth's long contour, her river veins. Down here in my cave, girded with root and rock, I am cradled in the dark that wombed me, and nurtured in every artery like a small hillock. Let each new hero come seeking the golden apples and Atlas. He must wrestle with me before he pass into that realm of fame. Among skyborn and royal, he may well throw me and renew my birth, but let him not plan lifting me off the earth, my elevation, my fall. And the corresponding poem at the end of the section of the section of the larger, because North has a number of sections, picks up on these same themes, though now in the third person rather than the first. This time Hercules does wrestle with him and prevails. He uses some of the same phrases. Skyborn and royal, snake choker, dung heaver, his mind big with golden apples, his future hung with trophies. Hercules has the measure of resistance and black powers feeding off the territory. Antaeus, mould hugger, is weaned at last. A fall was a renewal, but now he is raised up. The challenger's intelligence is a spur of light, a blue prong graping him out of his element into a dream of loss. And origins, the cradling dark, the river veins, the secret gullies of his strength, the hatching grounds of cave and souterrain, he has bequeathed it all to elegists. Balor will die, and Berthnoth, and Sitting Bull. Hercules lifts his arms in a remorseless V, his triumph unassailed by the powers he has shaken, and lifts and banks Antaeus high as a profiled ridge, a sleeping giant, pap for the dispossessed. There's an awful lot of those poems. That's how Heaney, I think, sees himself here, not in a self-pitying, but simply in a clear-eyed way, as one of the dispossessed, doomed to be overcome by the force of international and specifically British culture. Well, remember, he had a long-standing and usually good-humoured running battle with the Brits as to whether he was a British poet or not. He kept being claimed as such. But anyway, for whom a hero like Antaeus is pap or sustenance. You can't ultimately win against Hercules or the Vikings. He mentions Balor of the Evil Eye, who was defeated by Lug, and Berthnoth, who was defeated by the Vikings. And, of course, Sitting Bull, who wasn't defeated, of course, by General Custer, but was shot down later. You can't beat the Vikings, you can't beat the US government, even if you prevail briefly in the short run. But that's quite enough about Antaeus, I think. Let's turn to some Hellenic gems from the Hall Lantern, published in 1987. Here we may note that Heaney, in his conversations with O'Driscoll, credits his arrival in Harvard from 1982 on, and his acquaintance there with the distinguished classicist, poet, critic, and translator of Homer, Robert Fitzgerald, who was actually his predecessor as the Boylston Professor, with greatly deepening and broadening his understanding of Greek culture. And the Hall Lantern gives much evidence of that. The title poem of the collection itself contains a notable image from Greek antiquity, in the person of that formidable character, Diogenes the Cynic, who hung out in Athens, annoying the citizenry, rather like Socrates, of course, himself, in the mid-4th century BC, before moving with his barrel to Corinth, where he again annoyed the citizenry. Once again, as with Antaeus, the image of Diogenes is treated with fascinating subtlety. Heaney starts from a brush with a hawthorn tree in the middle of winter, when he finds himself confronting its bright red berry on a bare twig, and being confronted by it in turn. The story goes, as you're doubtless aware, that Diogenes was found one day, he was a bit of a show-off, making a point generally, in the Agora of Athens, going about in broad daylight with a lighted lantern. When challenged, which of course he was hoping would happen, as to what he thought he was doing, he declared that he was searching for a real man. Here's what Heaney makes of that tale. The wintry haw is burning out of season, crab of the thorn, a small light for small people, wanting no more from them than that they keep the wick of self-respect from dying out, not having to blind them with illumination. But sometimes, when your breath plumes in the frost, it takes the roaming shape of Diogenes with his lantern, seeking one just man. So you end up scrutinized from behind the haw he holds up at eye level on its twig, and you flinch before its bonded pith and stone, its blood prick that you wish would test and clear you, its pecked at ripeness, because the birds would be at it, that scans you and then moves on. Heaney the poet is abashed by the challenge of the haw shining redly on its wintry twig. From being just a brave little light, a small light for small people, the haw becomes more menacing and inquisitory. The lantern of Diogenes, probing and testing. It scans you pitilessly, and then, in a devastating final phrase, moves on. In other words, you failed the test. You have not been adjudged a real man. The next poem in the collection I will select, a daylight art, begins from the image of Socrates in prison, as portrayed in Plato's Phaedo, setting the fables of Aesop to verse, because in a dream he'd been told to practice musicae and work at it, or musicae is a fairly broad term, but he takes it as music or poetry. This dream, he reveals, had been coming to him all his life, and previously he had always taken musicae to be philosophy, on the grounds that that was the highest form of musicae, in the sense of culture in general. But now he feels that he'd better cover all possibilities by turning to poetry and music in the strict sense. It's probably a true story, and it's probably just a devious piece of Socratic irony, but it can be made great use of. On the day he was to take the poison, Socrates told his friends he had been writing, putting Aesop's fables into verse. And this was not because Socrates loved wisdom and advocated the examined life. The reason was that he'd had a dream. Caesar now, or Herod, or Constantine, or any number of Shakespearean kings bursting at the end like dams. I love that phrase, but I'm not quite sure what it means. Where original panoramas lie submerged, which have to rise again before the death scenes. You can believe in their believing dreams, but hardly Socrates. Until, that is, he tells his friends the dream had kept recurring. All his life, repeating one instruction: practice the art. Which art, until that moment, he always took to mean philosophy. Happy the man, therefore, with a natural gift for practicing the right one from the start. Poetry, say, or fishing. Whose nights are dreamless, whose deep-sunk panoramas rise and pass like daylight through the rod's eye or the nib's eye. Heaney, fully aware, I think, of the ironical nature of Socrates' statement, Socrates has, after all, no serious intention of becoming anything other than a philosopher, adds his own touch of irony by professing, at least, to envy the poet, or indeed the fisherman, who has never been afflicted by doubt as to his true vocation. Are we to conclude that the poet Heaney had occasional twinges of uncertainty as to whether he should have been, after all, a Loch Ness fisherman? If so, we can be sure that he was no more likely to act on that than was Socrates to declare himself a poet monkey and deny his true vocation. If I'm right about this, though, where does that leave the distinguished Scottish poet Norman McCaig, to whom the poem is dedicated? Is he perhaps being lightly teased? Passing over a number of fine poems which contain no Hellenic references, I come to another poem of some obscurity, but of great power, once one has understood the reference. The Stone Verdict. There's just one classical image in it, that of the god Hermes as a stone pile, but it's plainly central to the whole poem. It's important to bear in mind that this poem is a commemoration of his father, Patrick, who had recently died in 1986, and whom Seamus celebrates elsewhere as a strong, silent man. When he stands in the judgment place with his stick in his hand and his broad hat still on his head, maimed by self-doubt and an old disdain of sweet talk and excuses, it will be no justice if the sentence is blabbed out. He will expect more than words in the ultimate court he relied on through a lifetime's speechlessness. Let it be like the judgment of Hermes, god of the stone heap, where the stones were verdicts, cast solidly at his feet, piling up around him until he stood waist deep in the cairn of his apotheosis. Maybe a gate pillar or a tumbled wallstead where hogweed earths the silence. Someone will break at last to say, here his spirit lingers, and will have said too much. Here the image of his father standing before some posthumous tribunal to be judged is blended delightfully with an ideological myth about the connection of the god Hermes with stone piles that litter the ancient Greek countryside. I think as walkers today on hillsides, if you see a pile of stones, you can't resist adding another one. I have to admit I was unacquainted with this myth and had to appeal to the poet himself to explain it to me. In response, Seamus confessed that he'd found it while perusing a handbook of Greek mythology, which I myself had on my shelves, W.K.C. Guthrie's The Greeks and Their Gods, and which I'd frequently consulted, but without ever absorbing that particular detail. In fact, on page 88, Guthrie tells of the myth that when Hermes, at the bidding of Zeus, had killed the monster Argos, who had been set by Hera to guard the maiden Io, now in the form of a heifer, from the attentions of her husband, Hera had him brought to trial before a jury of the gods. Well, he's only following orders. The divine jury, however, acquitted Hermes, and they did so by each throwing his voting pebble at his feet. so that a heap of stones grew up around him. This odd tale, explaining why Hermes is symbolized by stone heaps, plainly attracted the poet's attention, and he stored it away until he needed it. Hence the rather esoteric imagery of the poem. He thus portrays his father as being triumphantly acquitted in respect of his conduct of his life, without having to compromise his ingrained taciturnity. Well, many more examples could be presented, but this is enough, I think, to demonstrate the extensive influence which ancient Greek culture had on Seamus's poetry. I'd like now to turn for a while to an examination of his versions of Greek tragedies, to provide some estimate of how he made creative use of some plays of Aeschylus and Sophocles. Euripides, strangely, perhaps he did not get round to. He was first attracted by the sad story of Philoctetes in Sophocles' play of that name. In a card to me from Boston in April of 1990, concerned with other matters, he ends with the announcement, "Meanwhile, I'm doing a version of Philoctetes. What next?" This, in fact, emerged not long after as The Cure at Troy. Dubbed irreverently at the time by his friend and mine, Seamus Heaney, as Puss in Boots, which was produced first in Derry by the Field Day Theatre Company that autumn and published the following spring. Of course, Seamus was not able to read Sophocles in the original, but he had good translations and good advice, and in any case he was concerned to produce more than a straight translation, which he triumphantly succeeds in doing. As he remarks to Dennis O'Driscoll, the main attraction was the material itself, in particular the way Sophocles explores the conflict experienced by the character Neoptolemus. The crunch that comes when the political solidarity required from him by the Greeks is at odds with the conduct he requires from himself if he's to retain his self-respect. That kind of dilemma was familiar to people on both sides of the political fence in Northern Ireland. People living in a situation where to speak freely and truly on certain occasions would be regarded as letting down the side. One could be excused for concluding that Seamus saw in Neoptolemus' dilemma a lot of his own predicament in not wishing to be sucked too far into identification with the Catholic nationalist side of the Northern Irish conflict, to be able to maintain his own integrity and freedom to comment dispassionately. At any rate, there's much in The Cure at Troy that relates to that struggle and to other similar contemporary issues. These references occur predominantly in the choruses. In the dialogue, he sticks pretty closely to Sophocles' text, though adorning it all through with his own felicitous renderings of the Greek, often employing Ulster idiom. For a start, he begins the play with a contribution from the chorus, where there is none in Sophocles, and he uses that to make a statement of some significance. Say, Philoctetes, Hercules, Odysseus, heroes, victims, gods and human beings, all throwing shapes, every one of them, convinced he's in the right, all of them glad to repeat themselves and their every last mistake, no matter what. People so deep into their own self-pity buoys them up. People so staunch and true they're fixated, shining with self-regard like polished stones, and their whole life spent admiring themselves for their own long suffering, licking their wounds and flashing them around like decorations. I hate it. I've always hated it, and I am a part of it myself. This is the chorus leader, and a part of you. For my part is the chorus, and the chorus is more or less a borderline between the you and the me and the it of it, between the gods and the human being sense of things. And that's the borderline that poetry operates on too, always in between what you would like to happen and what will, whether you like it or not. So that starts the whole play. He goes on to identify poetry as the voice of reality and justice with the voice of Hercules, who intervenes late in the play as a deus ex machina to resolve the impasse that has arisen through the nobility of Neoptolemus and the intransigence of Philoctetes, whom you will recall is adamantly refusing to have anything to do with the Greek leaders who unceremoniously dumped him on this deserted island because of his smelly, rotting foot and his ceaseless lamentations, but who now discover that they need him badly. The whole chorus, prefixed as it is to the text of Sophocles' play, is plainly more about contemporary Ulster than about the Trojan War. The same may surely be said of the closing chorus, which, by reason of being quoted by such luminaries as Bill Clinton and then by both Presidents Robinson and Michalis, as well as many others, has become one of the most famous things Seamus ever wrote. I am sure Mary's quite tired of it, and probably you are, but it's great stuff. Here the chorus, as I say, takes on, to a large extent, the role of Heracles in Sophocles' play. But before they speak as Heracles, they pronounce as follows: human beings suffer. They torture one another. They get hurt and get hard. No poem or play or song can fully right a wrong, inflicted and endured. The innocent in jails beat on their bars together. A hunger striker's father stands in the graveyard dumb. The police widow in veils faints at the funeral home. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then once in a lifetime the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. Well, as we know, Heracles intervenes to dissolve the total self-destructive intransigence of Philoctetes. He and Odysseus make up. He returns to Troy. The wound in his foot is cured. That's the wound in the bow. And with the help of his bow, together with the valour of young Neoptolemus, Troy is taken. In the case of Ulster, I suppose we'd have to look at the Herculean figure of Senator George Mitchell and the infinite patience and guile with which he crafted the Good Friday Agreement, April the 10th, 1998, some 8 years after this prophetic play was composed, thus presenting us with the marvellous spectacle of the Reverend Ian Paisley and Martin McGuinness starring together as the Chuckle Brothers. A show that still continues in a more muted way with Peter Robinson standing in for Dr. Paisley, insofar as anybody can. It was in and around 1994, in the wake of the IRA ceasefire in August that year, that Heaney engaged for a second time with Greek tragedy, this time with Aeschylus' Agamemnon. This, he says, was by way of a reaction to the ceasefire, but as he explains to O'Driscoll, his impulse was to give a snarl rather than sing a hymn. It wasn't really a matter of what was happening just then, more a rage at what had gone on in the previous 25 years. What emerged, Mycenae Lookout, is indeed one of his most savage poems, and none the less effective for that. A nice picture of Mycenae there. There are 5 parts to the poem. It takes its start from the famous prologue speech of the watchman on the roof of the royal palace in Mycenae, stationed there by the treacherous Clytemnestra to watch for the fire signals set up by her to warn her of her husband Agamemnon's return after the Trojan War. Heaney doesn't follow the text of Aeschylus in any slavish way, in fact combining the ruminations of the watchman with the later lamentations of the herald as to the evils of war and the interminable siege of Troy. Some people wept, and not for sorrow, joy that the king had armed and upped and sailed for Troy. But inside me, like struck sound in a gong, that killing fest, the life warp and world wrong it brought to pass, still augured and endured. I dream of blood in bright webs in a ford, of bodies raining down like tattered meat on top of me asleep. And me, the lookout, the Queen's command had posted and forgotten, the blind spot her far-sightedness relied on. This passage, according to Helen Wendler, Heaney's old friend and most perceptive critic, embodies a reference to a violent dream which he once had, in which a bloodied man fell towards him. And he's woven this into the Watchman's speech. His picture of Cassandra in the second part is particularly savage, drawn from her own utterances, when she's led in later in the play as Agamemnon's slave and proposed bedmate. She's presented as a distracted, waif-like sort of Bronze Age Sinead O'Connor. But of course endowed with the power of prophecy, though condemned by Apollo, whose approaches she had rejected, never to be believed. So, these abrupt little lines. No such thing as innocent bystanding. Her soiled vest, her little breasts, her clipped, devastated, scabbed, punk head, the char-eyed famine gawk. She looked camp-fucked and simple. People could feel a mist trueness in them, in their focus. A homecoming in her drop-winged, half-calculating bewilderment. No such thing as innocent. It may be that here Heaney has in mind the fact that during the Troubles the IRA used to subject girls who went out with British soldiers to having their hair shaved off to humiliate them. In any case, he presents a truly harrowing picture of Cassandra as a victim of war at the end of his poem, with an allusion to Cassandra's words in Aeschylus's play, as she passes into the palace to the death that she foresees at the hands of Clytemnestra. In she went, and there's the picture there really, to the knife, to the killer wife, to the net over her and her slaver, the Troy Reaver, saying, a wipe of the sponge, that's it. The shadow hinge swings unpredictably and the lights blanked out. It might seem strange that he dedicated this very savage poem to his good friends Dimitri Hadzi and his wife Cynthia, but then again not so strange, since it was with them that he enjoyed the first visit to Greece in 1995, when he was able to visit Mycenae, among other notable sites in the Peloponnese. Though in fact he'd composed Mycenae Lookout somewhat prior to this visit, and published it in a limited edition with artwork by Hadzi. At any rate, this poem sequence is all that emerged from his engagement with Aeschylus's Oresteia. His next penultimate approach to Greek drama was his version of Sophocles' Antigone, entitled The Burial at Thebes, produced by the Abbey Theatre as part of their centenary programme in 2004. Whereas he had the troubles in the north in mind in The Cure, in this case the stimulus was rather George Bush's War on Terror, Bush being represented by Creon, of course, and the likely consequences both for American society and for Western society in general of such an initiative. He even allows Creon, as reported by Antigone in the opening scene, to use some characteristic Bushism, or a characteristic Bushism about subversive elements. I'll flush them out. The play, as Heaney presents it, is very much about the creation of terrorists by labelling one's opponents as such. As far as Creon is concerned, Polynices is a terrorist. And so are those who take his side, like his sister Antigone. If you want to be soft on terrorists, you're a terrorist. Even his own son Haemon is later identified as a backslider and ultimately a supporter of terrorism. And we know where it all ends up. Once again, however, the most quotable aspects of the play are the choruses. Here's Heaney's version of Sophocles' famous Hymn to Man, lines 332 to 75. Among the many wonders of the world, where is the equal of this creature, man? First he was shivering on the shore in skins, or paddling in a dugout, terrified of drowning. Then he took up oars, put tackle on a mast, and steered himself by the stars through gales. Once upon a time from the womb of earth the gods were born, and he bowed down to worship them. He worked the land, stubbed the forests, and harnessed stallions, his furrows cropped. He feasted his eyes on hay and herds as far as the horizon. The wind is no more swift or mysterious than his mind and words. He has mastered thinking, roofed his house against hail and rain, and worked out laws for living together. Homemaker, thought-taker, measure of all things, he can heal with herbs and read the heavens. Nothing seems beyond him. When he yields to his gods, when truth is the treadle of his loom, and justice the shuttle, he'll be shown respect, the city will reward him. But let him once overstep what the city allows, tramp down right or treat the law wilfully as his own word, then let this wonder of the world remember. He'll have put himself beyond the pale. When he comes begging, we will turn our backs. In the context of the play, the chorus's comments might be directed either way. They're magnificently ambiguous, to Creon or to Antigone. But Sophocles' overall intention, as is Heaney's, is to denounce human pride and willfulness in general, which leads to taking a high hand with one's fellow men and with the natural environment, and on which ruin will surely attend. And that message is just as relevant, if not more so, to the political rulers and economic elites of today as it was to the Athenians in Sophocles' own time. Heaney's final brush with Greek tragedy occurs also in 2004 in connection with the death of the great Polish poet Czesław Miłosz. He'd had his eye for some time on producing a version of Sophocles' Oedipus the King or Oedipus at Colonus. But the fact that Yeats had done versions of both rather inhibited him, as he confessed. However, in connection with the passing away of Miłosz in Krakow in August 2004, at the age of 93, after his near century of trials and tribulations, including a long stay in Berkeley from 1961 to 1998 as Professor of Slavic Languages, where Heaney first met him, as did I, though I'm afraid I didn't adequately appreciate him at the time. He was inspired to connect Miłosz with the aged Oedipus, who was finally divinized by his sufferings, as the messenger reports at the end of Oedipus at Colonus, lines 1586 to 1666. And so we get the marvellous What Passed at Colonus in memory of Czesław Miłosz. It's too long to quote in full on the present occasion, but I'll give you the beginning and the end. His instruction calmed us. His company and voice were like high tidings in the summer trees. Except this time he turned away and left us. He walked to where the stream goes underground, and a steep bank paved with flagstones leads down to a lintel in the earthwork. And there he stood, studying what next, between a stone cairn and a marble plaque to the dead of our late wars. Other wars and words were in my mind. Another last look taken upon earth, roads shining after rain, like uphill rivers, so that I all but wept for his loneliness. And now he was a stranger. He groped in air as the daughters went to him, heads on his breast, and he found and kissed their brows, instructing them one final time. They were to turn and go, and these were his words exactly, not look upon things that were not for seeing, nor listen to things not for hearing. And what he said to them we took again as meant for all of us. So turned away together when he turned away, with the king accompanying him. But after a few steps I and other ones halted to look back. He was gone from sight. That much I could see. And against the sky the king had his arm up, shielding his two eyes, as if from some brilliant light or blinding dread. Next he was on his knees, head bowed to earth, in homage to those gods who dwell in it. Then up again with his arms spread out to honour the gods on high, like a windlass being turned by every power above him and below. Raised art and knowledge into knowledge, sole witness of what passed. No god had galloped his thunder chariot, no hurricane had swept the hill. Call me mad if you like, or gullible, but that man surely went in step with a guide he trusted, down to where light has gone out, but the door stands open. The last two lines, you may note, are Heaney's own, but there is much creativity throughout the whole version, and it's a very fine tribute to Miłosz. By way of an ending, I thought that I'd turn to a poem primarily about his experience of modern Greece. It's the first of a sequence of 6 sonnets from Greece, from Hellas, included in his 2001 collection, Electric Light, but still suffused with reverence for the past, though there's much humour in it too. It's a record of an incident that occurred on the momentous journey through the Peloponnesus with Dimitri and Cynthia Hadzi on the eve of the awarding of the Nobel Prize. That was Heaney's introduction to contemporary Greece. What's happened is simply that as they are on the point of entering Arcadia, they find a truckload of apples spilled on the road. The poem is called Into Arcadia. It was opulence and amen on the mountain road, walnuts bought on a high pass from a farmer who'd worked in Melbourne once and now trained water through a system of pipes and runnels of split reed, known in Hellas probably since Hesiod. That was the least of it. When we crossed the border from Argos into Arcadia and farther into Arcadia, a lorry load of apples had burst open on the road, so that for yards our tires raunched and scrunched them. But we drove on, juiced up and fleshed and spattered, revelling in it. And then it was the goat herd with his goats in the forecourt of a filling station, subsisting beyond eclogue and translation. In this light-hearted, even comic account of entry into Arcadia, it's perhaps this closing image of the goat herd in the filling station that encapsulates best how for Heaney the modern reality of Greece remains intertwined with its past. The scrunching of the apples, though, plainly had a deep significance for him as well, as I can recall him mentioning that to me as a notable feature of his adventure. He may have felt that the old gods of nature, Pan and the nymphs, had in some way spread a carpet of apples to welcome him into the symbolic home of pastoral poetry, and that the goat herd was confirming this. In a way, he was coming home to Hellas to be hand in hand with the world.
So I will pass you over now to our three readers who will read the poems I've mentioned in sequence. Thank you.
Σκάβοντας. Ανάμεσα στο δάχτυλο και τον αντίχειρά μου η κοντόχοντρη πένα φωλιάζει. Είναι ζεστή σαν όπλο. Κάτω από το παράθυρό μου ένας καθαρός γριτσανιστός ήχος, όπως το φτιάρι βυθίζεται στο χαλίκι χώμα. Ο πατέρας μου σκάβει. Κοιτάω κάτω, ως τους τεντωμένους γλουτούς του, ανάμεσα στα παρτέρια. Χαμηλώνουν, σηκώνονται, μετά 20 χρόνια, σκύβοντας ρυθμικά ανάμεσα στις παρμένες πατάτες, εκεί όπου έσκαβε. Το χοντροπάπουτσό του, σκαλωμένο στη λαβή, το στυλιάρι μαγκωμένο, με το γόνατό του από μέσα, σταθερός γινόταν μοχλός. Ξερίζωνε τα ψηλά βλαστάρια, έθαβε το γυαλιστερό χείλος βαθιά, για να σκορπίσει νέες πατάτες, που εμείς μαζεύαμε και μας άρεσε η δροσερή σκληράδα τους στα χέρια μας. Μα το Θεό, ο γέρος ήξερε να δουλεύει το φτιάρι, ίδιος ο γέρος του. Ο παππούς μου σε μια μέρα έκοβε περισσότερη τύρφη από οποιονδήποτε άλλο στο παλτοτόπι του Τόνερ. Μια φορά του πήγα γάλα σε μια μπουκάλα, βουλωμένη πρόχειρα με χαρτί. Στυλώθηκε να το πιει και έπειτα έπεσε πάλι με τα μούτρα στη δουλειά. Χαράζει, κόβει ομοιόμορφες φέτες, βγάζει και πετάει τα χώματα. Πάνω από τον ώμο του πηγαίνει όλο και πιο βαθιά για την καλή τύρφη, σκάβει. Η κρύα μυρωδιά της μούχλας της πατάτας, το στύψιμο και το χτύπημα του βρεμένου λιμονάνθρακα Οι σκληρές κοψιές με σαπορίζες ζωντανές ξυπνούν μες στο μυαλό μου, αλλά δεν έχω φτιάρι να ακολουθήσω άντρες σαν κι αυτούς. Ανάμεσα στο δάχτυλο και τον αντίχειρά μου η κοντόχοντρη πένα φωλιάζει. Μ' αυτήν θα σκάψω.
I have no voice to follow men like them, but digging. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father digging. I look down till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug, the shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. Once I carried him milk in a bottle corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mould, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuts of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. And the other poem that Petros is going to read in Katharina's translation is Personal Helicon, and it's inscribed here for Michael Longley. As a child, they could not keep me from wells and old pumps with buckets and windlasses. I loved the dark drop, the trapped sky, the smells of waterweed, fungus and dank moss. One in a brickyard with a rotted board top, I savoured the rich crash when a bucket plummeted down at the end of a rope, so deep you saw no reflection in it. A shallow one under a dry stone ditch, fructified like any aquarium. When you dragged out long roots from the soft mulch, a white face hovered over the bottom. Others had echoes, gave back your own call with a clean new music in it. And one was scaresome, for there, out of ferns and tall foxgloves, a rat slapped across my reflection. Now, to pry into roots, to finger slime, to stare big-eyed Narcissus into some spring is beneath all adult dignity. I rhyme to see myself, to set the darkness echoing.
Perhaps I could start on a lighter note and say that in the spirit of Seamus Heaney, there are actually present here two very famous poets still alive. We've had one, the other one is at the back, called Brendan Kennelly. And we joined Trinity College almost at the same time, back in 1962, and on occasions we would go to O'Neill's in Suffolk Street. And after a few drinks, Brendan Kennelly would recite one of his poems, and I felt I ought to recite a Greek poem in Greek. After which Brendan said, "Petros, I haven't understood a word of what you said, but it sounds beautifully." Now, most of you will not understand a single word of the poem I'm going to recite, but I hope it will sound just as beautiful. Σαν ήμουν μικρός, δεν μπορούσαν να με ξεκολλήσουν από τα πηγάδια και τις παλιές αντλίες με τους γουβάδες και τα μαγκάνια. Τρελανόμουνα για το μαύρο βάρθρο, τον παγιδευμένο ουρανό, τις μυρωδιές από τα νερολούλουδα, τη μούχλα, τα νοτισμένα μούσκλα. Ένα στη μάντρα με τα τούβλα που είχε για σκέπη μια σάπια σανίδα, απολάμβανα τον πλούσιο ήχο του βουβά, σαν την αζόταν στο τέλος του σκηνιού του, τόσο βαθιά που δεν έβλεπες είδωλο κανένα. Ήταν και ένα ρηχό κάτω από ένα χαντάκι, καρπερό σαν όποιο άλλο ενητρίο. Σαν τραβούσες και έβγαζες ρίζες μακριές από τα μαλακά φιλοπαλτό, ένα πρόσωπο λευκό αιωρίτο πάνω από τον πάτο. Άλλα πηγάδια είχαν ηχό. Επέστρεψαν την ίδια σου τη φωνή με μια νέα καθάρια μουσική μέσα της. Και ένα πηγάδι ήταν τρομακτικό, γιατί να σου μέσα στις στέρες και τα ψηλά χελιδονόχορτα ένας σποντικός διέσχιζε σαν αστραπή το είδωλό μου. Βέβαια, το να χώνεις τη μύτη σου στις ρίζες, να ψαχουλεύεις την υλή, να κοιτάς και να ξανακοιτάς τον άρκισο εαυτό σου μορθά νύχτα μάτια σε κάποια πηγή, δεν είναι στο ύψος της ενήλικης αξιοπρέπειας. Γράφω στίχους για να δω τον εαυτό μου, για να κάνω το μαύρο να αντιλαλήσει.
So now, before I hand you over to Dr. Alan Peatfield for the final vote of thanks, it's traditional for the Irish Hellenic Society to present a small award to a nominated student of classics. And this year, the college has nominated Ms. Lucy Witherington. So is Lucy here? Yes. Oh, is that Lucy? Yeah. So if you'd like to come up and take a bow. Congratulations, Lucy, and a big round of applause. And finally, I almost forgot the most important thing, to pass you over to Dr. Alan Peatfield, the chair of the Irish Institute for Hellenic Studies in Athens, who will give us his final and concluding remarks on this wonderful evening. Thank you, Alan.
Mrs. Heaney, Miss Heaney, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It falls to me to, I suppose, bookend, as Christina, Director of the Irish Institute, introduced this. It falls to me as Chairman to end it, bring it to a close. And also to remind you that things will not entirely finish until we have had the reception, which is provided by Odeus Foods and Jason O'Brien over in the atrium across the way. So finally, we need to vote our thanks to our eminent speaker, John Dillon, and to our very smooth and articulate performers. Michalis Stavrinos, Theo Dorgan, and of course Petros Florides. But our real thanks for this evening lies, shall we say, somewhere else. And that is, of course, as John quoted the words from Seamus Heaney's Philoctetes, poetry lies between the poet and the audience. So in that sense, our thanks will continue forever as Seamus Heaney's words are appreciated by you, the audience. So please, let us put our hands together for our final thanks.